I did not expect anything dramatic that night. That is probably why it stayed with me. Daniel and I had eaten at that Italian place in Naperville dozens of times before. Same brick walls, same low amber lights, same hostess who always smiled like she remembered us even if she did not. It was supposed to be comfortable, familiar, a quiet anniversary dinner between two people in their late 50s who had already lived enough life to know better than to look for fireworks. The first thing I noticed was how tense Daniel seemed in the car. He drove with both hands tight on the steering wheel, jaw set, eyes flicking down to his phone at every red light. I asked if everything was okay, and he said yes too quickly, not annoyed, not defensive, just rushed, like he wanted the question gone so he could get back to waiting for something. I told myself I was imagining it. After 4 years together, you learn the difference between real unease and ordinary distraction. That night sat somewhere in between. Inside the restaurant, nothing was wrong in any obvious way. The hostess greeted us by name. Our table was ready. The air smelled like garlic and wine and baked bread. Daniel pulled out my chair, the way he always did. Careful and polite, the way men our age are taught to be when they are trying to do things right. I thanked him and sat down, smoothing my napkin over my lap, thinking about how lucky I was that at this stage of life, love had been calm. Then I saw Monica. She was seated 2 tables over, angled just enough that I could see her face when she laughed. Monica Hayes, 59, realtor, always perfectly styled, always leaning toward whoever she was speaking to, like she was collecting information. Diane Foster sat beside her, arms crossed even while holding her wine glass, that familiar tightness around her mouth that suggested disappointment with the entire concept of men. Cynthia Lane was there too, perched forward in her chair, chin resting in her hand, eyes alert and curious in that way she called intuitive. The 3 of them together were impossible to miss. Daniel followed my gaze and stiffened. He gave a small wave in their direction, then immediately picked up his menu like it was suddenly fascinating. He did not mention them. He did not explain. He did not even look surprised to see them there. I asked if he knew they were coming. He said they were just grabbing dinner too. Same place, same time. Total coincidence. His voice had that careful flatness it gets when he wants something to sound reasonable. I nodded, but something in my chest tightened. Not jealousy, not anger, just awareness. We ordered wine. Daniel checked his phone again while the server poured. I asked if he needed to take a call. He said no, everything was fine. Then turned his phone face down on the table like someone trying very hard to prove a point. Conversation did not flow the way it usually did. Normally we talked about work, about the house projects we never quite finished, about the strange relief of being older and no longer needing to impress anyone. That night his answers were shorter. He asked fewer questions. When I spoke, he listened, but not fully. His attention seemed split, like he was waiting for a cue. At one point, Cynthia glanced over from her table and caught my eye. She smiled. Not warm, not unfriendly either, observant, like she was watching a scene unfold exactly as expected. Monica leaned in to say something to her, and they both laughed. Not loudly, but in a way that felt pointed. Diane did not laugh at all. She just looked over, assessed me, then turned away. I told myself again that this meant nothing, that grown adults could eat in the same restaurant without it being a thing, that I was not 25 anymore, primed to read danger into every sideways glance. But the feeling did not leave. It settled in quietly and stayed. Daniel excused himself to use the restroom. He took his phone with him. When he came back, he seemed more wound up than before, like his shoulders were holding tension instead of relaxing. He sat down and took a breath that felt practiced, the kind you take before saying something you have rehearsed, even if you're not sure you want to say it yet. I asked him if he was nervous about something. He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. He said he had just been thinking about where things were going. It was not alarming on its own. Couples our age talk about those things. But the timing felt wrong, heavy. I noticed the server slow her steps near our table. Not eavesdropping exactly, but attentive in that way service workers get when they sense tension. I almost laughed at that. How even strangers could feel it. Daniel took a sip of wine, then set the glass down carefully. His phone vibrated. He ignored it. Then it vibrated again. He glanced at it, then at me, then pushed it closer to the edge of the table, like putting distance between himself and something dangerous. I asked if he wanted to talk later, at home. He said no. It was fine. We could talk now. His voice sounded thinner than usual. He cleared his throat. Across the room, Monica stopped talking. Cynthia leaned back slightly, eyes on us. Diane folded her arms tighter. Nothing had happened yet. That is the part people rarely understand when I try to explain it later. There was no shouting, no accusations, no scene. Just a growing sense that I was sitting in a room where decisions had already been made somewhere else. I looked at Daniel and tried to remember the man I met in 2019. The man who talked about stability like it was a shared value, not a bargaining chip. The man who once told me he was too old for games. That was what made the unease sharper, not fear of losing him, but the feeling that he was not fully present in his own life anymore. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His phone buzzed again. He did not look at it this time, but his eyes flicked down anyway, like a reflex. I realized then that whatever was coming was not just between the two of us. It had an audience. I straightened in my chair, not defensively, just alert. I told myself that whatever this was, I would meet it calmly. I had survived a divorce, raised myself back up in my 50s, built a life that did not depend on anyone else's approval. I was not fragile. Daniel finally looked at me fully. His expression was a mix of nerves and resolve, like someone stepping onto a stage. He said my name, just my name, nothing after it yet. The pause stretched. The clink of silverware from nearby tables filled the space. Somewhere behind us, a couple laughed, life continuing, oblivious. In that moment, before a single word changed anything, I understood something important. Whatever was about to happen, I was already being watched, judged, measured, and for the first time that evening, I knew I would not play along. Whatever the rules turned out to be, the server approached with our appetizers, interrupting the silence. Daniel leaned back, moon flashing across his face. The smell rich and familiar. Daniel picked up his fork, then set it back down without taking a bite. He looked at his phone one more time, then turned it face down again. I waited. The night was not over yet. I let the moment pass without filling it. That was something I had learned the hard way years ago, that silence often tells you more than words ever will. Daniel eventually picked up his fork, took a bite he barely tasted, and started talking about traffic on Route 59, about a new tenant coming into the shopping center he managed, about anything that did not require him to look directly at me. We ate in pieces, conversation drifting and restarting like a radio with bad reception. When we finally left the restaurant, the air outside felt cooler than it should have. Daniel walked a step ahead of me toward the car, keys already in his hand. He opened my door, waited until I was seated, then closed it gently. He did not ask how I felt. I did not ask what he had wanted to say. We drove home in a quiet that was not comfortable but not explosive either. It was the quiet of something unfinished. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about how strange it was that unease could exist without a clear reason. Nothing had happened. No argument. No revelation. And yet I could feel a shift, subtle but undeniable, like the ground settling after a tremor. I did not sleep much. Daniel fell asleep quickly, his breathing steady, like someone who had handed off responsibility to someone else. In the early hours, I got up and made coffee, standing alone in the kitchen, watching the first light creep in through the window. I told myself not to spiral. I reminded myself that I was not young, not prone to drama, not the type to invent problems where there were none. Still, the feeling lingered. That morning, I drove to a client site in Downers Grove. I had been consulting on a remodel for a small assisted living facility, the kind of work that required patience and attention to detail. The director, a woman my age named Susan, greeted me with her usual warmth. We walked through the space together, discussing paint colors, lighting, furniture placement. It grounded me. Work often did. There was something reassuring about decisions that were practical and immediate. As I moved through this day, my phone stayed quiet. Daniel did not text. That was not unusual. but combined with the night before, it felt deliberate. I found myself replaying small moments from the last year, comments he had made, phrases that sounded oddly familiar. At the time I had brushed them off as coincidence, now they lined up differently. We had met in the spring of 2019 at a community fundraiser, one of those events you attend out of obligation and leave pleasantly surprised. Daniel had been charming in a low-key way. He listened more than he spoke. He asked questions that suggested he cared about the answers. We were both divorced, both wary, both relieved to be past the age of grand gestures and emotional games. Or so I thought. In the early days, he had talked a lot about stability, about wanting something calm, about how his first marriage taught him the value of peace. I believed him because it aligned with what I wanted too. We built our relationship slowly, weeknight dinners, weekend errands, long walks where conversation flowed easily. He never pressured me. I never felt rushed. For a long time, that was enough. Over the years, his friends were always present, but I did not consider that a threat. People our age often carry their social circles tightly. Monica with her constant analysis, Diane with her skepticism that bordered on bitterness, Cynthia with her theories about emotional energy and tests of devotion. They were loud where Daniel was quiet, decisive where he was accommodating. I assume that balance worked for him. Looking back, I realize how often he deferred to them without saying it outright. He would mention that Monica thought something was a red flag, that Diane warned him about certain behaviors, that Cynthia believed discomfort was necessary for growth. I would listen, nod, occasionally push back. He never argued with me, but he rarely argued with them either. He absorbed opinions like water into sand. By the time I returned home that afternoon, I felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with work. Daniel was not there yet. I reheated leftovers and ate alone at the kitchen counter, watching the driveway through the window. When his car finally pulled in, the familiar relief did not come with it. He walked in, kissed my cheek, asked how my day was. I told him about the facility, about choosing warmer lighting for the common areas. He nodded, distracted, checking his phone again before setting it down. I asked him if everything was okay. He said yes, again too quickly. That night we sat on the couch, television on but ignored. At one point, he mentioned offhandedly that a woman at work had complimented his jacket. He said it casually, like an observation, but his eyes flicked toward me when he said it. I smiled and told him it was a good jacket. He frowned slightly, as if that was not the reaction he expected. A few days later, he canceled plans with little notice, said he was not feeling up to it. I told him that was fine, suggested we reschedule. There was a pause on the line, then he said, okay. When we talked the next day, he acted as if nothing unusual had happened. Another time, we passed a woman on the sidewalk who glanced in our direction. Daniel commented that she had checked him out. I laughed and said she was probably looking at the coffee shop behind us. He went quiet after that. None of it was dramatic on its own. If I had told a friend, it would have sounded petty, almost silly, but together, the moments formed a pattern, small provocations, comments designed to elicit something, reactions that did not come. One evening, I mentioned all of this to my friend Evelyn. We have known each other for decades, long enough that pretense is unnecessary. She listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful. When I finished, she said calmly that it sounded like someone was pushing Daniel to test boundaries. She asked who he had been spending time with lately. I did not need to answer. That night, I lay awake again, thinking about how strange it was to feel evaluated in a relationship at this stage of life. I had raised myself back from heartbreak once already. I had rebuilt. I was not interested in proving my worth to anyone. Daniel seemed unsettled in the days that followed. He oscillated between affectionate and distant, attentive and withdrawn. It was as if he was waiting for me to fail at something I did not know I was being graded on. I watched him more closely after that. Not suspiciously, just observant. I noticed how often his phone lit up with messages from Monica, Diane, and Cynthia. How he would read them, then sigh, then look at me with something like uncertainty. I wondered how many conversations about our relationship had happened without me. By the end of that week, I knew something was coming. I could feel it in the way he rehearsed sentences under his breath, the way he avoided eye contact when topics drifted too close to us. The calm I had trusted for years One evening, as we sat at the kitchen table going over weekend plans, Daniel hesitated before speaking. He said he had been thinking about where we were headed. The words sounded familiar, not wrong, just borrowed. I told him we could talk whenever he wanted. He nodded, relief flickering across his face, then changed the subject. As I washed dishes later, I realized that whatever conversation he was preparing for was not truly his. The language did not belong to him. The tension did not originate with us. I dried my hands, turned off the light, and went upstairs. In the quiet of the bedroom, I understood something with a clarity that surprised me. If this relationship required me to react on cue, to perform emotion to satisfy an unseen audience, then it was already something I did not recognize. I lay down and stared into the dark. Not angry, not afraid, just awake. Somewhere in the house. Daniel's phone buzzed again. I did not reach for it. I stayed still and let the sound fade on its own. Whatever was happening on that phone did not belong to me, and I was no longer willing to chase answers that were being kept just out of reach. The next morning, Daniel acted almost cheerful, as if the tension of the past week had reset overnight. He made coffee, asked if I wanted eggs, talked about errands we needed to run. It felt rehearsed, like he was trying to return us to a version of normal that no longer existed. Later that afternoon, we met Monica, Diane, and Cynthia for lunch at a cafe near Oakbrook Center. It was one of their suggestions. Framed as casual, spontaneous, nothing serious, I almost declined, but curiosity won out. I wanted to see them together again now that my awareness had shifted. Monica arrived first. Perfectly put together as always, hair smooth, nails immaculate, phone already in her hand. She hugged Daniel warmly, held him at arm's length for a moment like she was checking his posture, then turned to me with a quick smile that did not quite land. Diane followed, nodding in greeting, already scanning the room like she was cataloging potential threats. Cynthia came last, breezing in with an energy that filled space, talking about traffic and intuition and how she had felt pulled to suggest this lunch. We sat, ordered, exchanged small talk. From the outside, it probably looked like any group of friends catching up. But once the food arrived, the conversation shifted. Monica leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes sharp with interest. She asked how long Daniel and I had been together again, even though she knew the answer. When I told her, she nodded thoughtfully, as if updating a mental file. Diane commented on how relationships change after a certain age, how people get complacent, how men often take advantage of women who are too understanding. She glanced at Daniel when she said it, then back at me, waiting for a reaction. I gave none. Cynthia smiled and said discomfort was necessary for growth, that if love did not challenge you, it probably was not real. She talked about emotional plateaus and the importance of testing connection. Daniel listened intently, eyes flicking between them, absorbing every word. I felt like I was sitting in a focus group about my own relationship. They were not overtly rude. They were careful, strategic. Each comment was framed as concern, as insight, as wisdom earned through experience. And Daniel, who once prided himself on independence, said very little. He nodded. He murmured agreement. He did not push back. At one point, Monica turned to me and asked how I handled conflict. She phrased it lightly, but the question was pointed. I told her I preferred direct communication and calm discussion. She smiled slowly and said that sometimes calm could be avoidance. Diane added that passion mattered, that people needed to fight for love. Cynthia agreed, saying stillness could be a sign of emotional detachment. Daniel watched me closely as they spoke, like he was waiting to see if I would defend myself, argue, prove something. I felt no urge to do any of that. Instead, I said simply that I believed peace was underrated. The table went quiet for a beat. Cynthia tilted her head, studying me. Monica scribbled something on a notepad she always carried, though I doubted she was actually writing anything important. After lunch, Daniel walked me to the car. He asked what I thought. I told him honestly that his friends seemed invested in analyzing our relationship. He laughed it off, said they were just protective, that they cared about him. I asked if he felt protected or managed. He hesitated, then said he had not thought about it that way. In the days that followed, their presence intensified, Group dinners, group texts, casual drop-ins. Daniel's phone became an extension of his hand. He read messages and grew pensive. He repeated phrases I recognized from Monica's analyses and Cynthia's theories. He asked questions that felt less like curiosity and more like prompts. One evening, he asked if I ever worried that we were too comfortable. I asked what he meant by too comfortable. He said sometimes comfort could be mistaken for indifference. The wording felt familiar. I asked him where that idea came from. He shrugged and said he had just been thinking. Another time, he mentioned that Diane believed relationships needed friction to stay alive. He said it as if he was quoting a book. I told him I disagreed. He nodded, but did not argue, did not engage. It was like my opinion was one data point among many, not something to be weighed more heavily than the rest. I started noticing how often decisions were deferred, where to go, what to do, when to talk. Daniel would say he wanted to think about it, then come back with an answer that mirrored something Monica or Cynthia had said earlier. It was subtle, but consistent. One afternoon, Cynthia stopped by unannounced while I was working from home. She sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea, talking about energy shifts and relational mirrors. She said she sensed Daniel was conflicted, that he wanted reassurance. She asked if I felt willing to show more vulnerability. The question was framed gently, but it carried an implication, that something was lacking on my end. I told her that vulnerability did not always look like emotional displays, that sometimes it looked like consistency. She smiled and said consistency could become stagnant. I did not respond. She left shortly after, hugging Daniel tightly on her way out. That night, I told Daniel I felt crowded, that his friends seemed overly involved in things that should have been between us. He looked uncomfortable, then defensive. He said they were just trying to help, that they had his best interests at heart. I asked where my interests fit into that equation. He did not answer directly. I could see the split forming in him. On one side, the man I knew, who valued calm and autonomy. On the other, the chorus of voices telling him he needed more. That something was missing, that love should be louder, messier, harder. He seemed torn between trusting himself and trusting them. I did not raise my voice. I did not issue ultimatums. He promised to set boundaries. He said he understood. He kissed my forehead and told me he loved me. I wanted to believe him, but behavior speaks louder than reassurance. The group text continued. The commentary did not stop. If anything, it grew more focused. I caught fragments of messages when his phone lit up. Words like distance, reaction, commitment. They were not talking about their own lives. They were talking about us. By the end of that month, I no longer felt like a participant in my own relationship. I felt like a subject, observed, evaluated, measured against standards I had never agreed to. One evening, as Daniel showered, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I did not pick it up. I did not need to. The name on the screen told me enough. Cynthia, another message waiting to be read. I turned away and sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in my lap, breathing slowly. I thought about how strange it was that at 58, with a full life behind me, I was being drawn into dynamics that belonged to people still figuring themselves out. When Daniel came out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, he asked if everything was okay. I told him I was tired. It was true, though not in the way he probably assumed. That night, as I lay awake once more, I understood something clearly. The issue was no longer whether his friends were overstepping. The issue was that Daniel was letting them. And that realization changed the shape of everything that came after. Downstairs, his phone vibrated again, muffled by the couch cushions. I stayed where I was, eyes open, listening to the quiet settle. Something was moving beneath the surface now, and it was only a matter of time before it broke through. The next invitation came from Daniel himself, delivered with a careful smile and a tone that suggested it was supposed to mean something. He said his parents wanted us over for dinner, that they had been asking about me, that it would be nice to spend a quiet evening together. I agreed without hesitation. Part of me still believed that if there was solid ground anywhere in this situation, it would be with family. His parents lived in a modest house in Lisle, the kind of place that had not changed much in decades. Neatly trimmed hedges, a porch light already on, even though it was still early evening. the faint smell of something roasting drifting out when the door opened. His mother greeted us warmly, touching my arm as if we were already familiar. His father followed behind her, nodding, smiling, and saying it was good to see us. It all felt reassuring at first. Daniel's sister Laura was there too, 63, calm, observant, the kind of woman who did not waste words. She hugged me and held my gaze for just a second longer than necessary, like she was taking note of something. I had always liked her. She asked questions and actually waited for the answers. We sat down at the dining table, plates already set, glasses filled. The room was comfortable, familiar, heavy with the weight of years lived quietly. I let myself relax a little. This was the environment Daniel came from. This was where he learned what normal looked like. Then the doorbell rang. Daniel's mother excused herself, saying it must be Monica. I felt my stomach tighten before I could stop it. A moment later, Monica walked in, followed by Diane and Cynthia, all smiles and easy confidence, as if this were exactly where they belonged. They greeted Daniel's parents like old friends, kissed cheeks, commented on the food, slid into seats at the table without hesitation. No one looked surprised. No one questioned it. It was presented as natural, inevitable. Daniel glanced at me briefly, a flicker of apology crossing his face before it vanished. He did not explain. He did not check in. He simply took his seat, like this was the most normal thing in the world. Dinner began politely enough. Daniel's mother asked about my work. His father talked about a neighbor who had replaced his fence incorrectly. Laura poured water and made small comments that softened the edges of conversation. If I had frozen the scene at that moment, it would have looked like any family gathering. But it did not stay that way. Monica leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, and asked how long I had been consulting independently instead of working for a firm. Her tone was light, but there was a sharpness beneath it. I answered calmly, explaining that I valued flexibility and autonomy. She nodded slowly, like she was logging the information. Diane chimed in about how unstable freelance work could be, especially at our age, how security mattered more than passion once you got older. I smiled and said security looked different for everyone. Cynthia added that sometimes people hid behind independence because they were afraid of real emotional investment. She said it gently, but her eyes stayed on me. I waited for Daniel to say something, to redirect, to change the subject. He did not. He took a bite of food, chewed, swallowed, and remained silent. Laura shifted in her chair. She cleared her throat and asked her father about a story from his old job, pulling the focus away. For a few minutes, the tension eased. I could feel her trying to keep the evening from sliding somewhere uncomfortable. But the commentary returned, woven into conversation like barbs wrapped in velvet. Monica mentioned how relationships often stagnated when one person was too accommodating. Diane talked about men who lost respect when women did not demand enough. Cynthia spoke about emotional tests, how they revealed true commitment. Each statement was framed as general wisdom, not directed at me, but the implication hung heavy in the air. I ate slowly, tasting very little. I was not angry. I was not embarrassed. I was alert. I watched Daniel closely, waiting for any sign that he recognized what was happening. He looked uncomfortable, but not enough to intervene. He smiled when his mother laughed. He nodded when Monica spoke. He stayed quiet when the conversation edged too close to us. At one point, Laura's eyes met mine across the table. There was no confusion in her expression, just recognition. After dinner, we moved into the living room. Coffee was poured, plates were cleared. Monica and Cynthia settled onto the couch like they owned it. Diane perched on the armchair, arms crossed, surveying the room. Daniel's parents tried to keep conversation light, but every time I spoke, one of the three friends found a way to interject. Laura finally stood and asked Daniel to help her carry something into the kitchen. Her tone made it clear this was not a request. They disappeared down the hallway, leaving me with his parents and the trio of commentators. Monica asked if Daniel and I had talked about the future recently. I said we had, in our own way. Diane said clarity was important, that ambiguity was dangerous. Daniel's mother looked uncomfortable but said nothing. His father focused on his coffee cup. A few minutes later, Laura returned alone. She caught my eye and nodded toward the front door. I excused myself quietly, grabbed my coat, and followed her outside. The night air was cool. The porch light cast long shadows across the driveway. Laura stood with her arms folded, looking out toward the street rather than at me. She spoke softly, without drama. She said she had talked to Daniel more than once about his friends, about how much space they took up in his decisions. She said he defended them, said they were just trying to help, that I was overthinking things. She paused, then told me plainly that she did not agree. She said she liked me, that she respected how I carried myself, that she saw what was happening at the table. She told me that if Daniel did not learn to set boundaries, this would not end well for anyone involved. I listened without interrupting. Her words did not shock me. They confirmed what I already felt. She added that I deserved to know what I was walking into, that family silence was not the same as family approval, that loving someone did not mean accepting commentary from a committee. Before I could respond, the door opened. Daniel stepped out, holding my coat like he had forgotten it earlier. He smiled, oblivious to the weight of the conversation that had just taken place. We said our goodbyes. His parents hugged me warmly, told me to come again soon. Monica smiled thinly. Diane nodded. Cynthia squeezed Daniel's arm like a reassurance. On the drive home, Daniel talked about how nice it was to have everyone together, how his friends fit in so well with his family, how it felt good to know people cared. I stared out the window, watching streetlights pass in steady rhythm. I thought about Laura standing on the porch, choosing honesty over comfort. I thought about Daniel at the table, choosing silence. Nothing catastrophic had happened. No raised voices, no scenes, just a dinner, just words, just choices. But somewhere between that driveway and our front door, I realized something fundamental had shifted. That night was the first time I truly felt like there were too many people in our relationship. And once you feel that, you cannot unfeel it. The weeks after that dinner did not explode all at once. They thinned instead, stretched out, frayed at the edges until the strain was impossible to ignore. Nothing loud happened. Nothing that would have justified anger in the way people expect anger to look. What changed were the small agreements we had always relied on, the unspoken rhythms that used to hold us steady. The first test came quietly. We had plans for a Friday evening, nothing elaborate, just takeout and a movie at home. An hour before he was supposed to arrive, Daniel texted that he was not feeling up to it. No apology, no suggestion to reschedule, just a flat statement. I stared at the screen for a moment, noticing the phrasing more than the cancellation itself. It read like an experiment, not a message. I replied that it was fine, and to let me know when another day worked. I meant it. I went on with my evening, heated dinner for myself, watched a show I liked. He did not respond. The next day he acted as if nothing had happened, cheerful, attentive, relieved. I noted the relief. A few days later, he mentioned in passing that a woman at work had complimented his shirt. He said it while watching my face, as if tracking a reaction. I smiled and told him it was a good shirt. He blinked, then nodded slowly. The conversation died there. He seemed unsettled by how quickly it ended. The third test came during a walk downtown. A woman passed us on the sidewalk, glanced briefly in our direction. Daniel commented that she had checked him out. I laughed and said she was probably looking for the cafe behind us. He frowned and asked if I was not jealous. I told him no. I asked if I should be. He did not answer. Individually, these moments were nothing. Together, they formed a pattern that felt deliberate. Provocation followed by observation. Silence where reassurance used to live. I recognized it not because I had lived it before, but because it was so transparent once I stopped giving it the benefit of the doubt. I did not confront him right away. I watched instead. I paid attention to timing, to the way his phone lit up before certain comments, to how his mood shifted after reading messages he did not share. I noticed that his questions came in clusters, as if prompted. He asked whether I felt connected, whether I ever worried we were drifting, whether I would fight harder if things got difficult. The language was not his. It sounded rehearsed. One night, after another manufactured disagreement about a text, I had not answered quickly enough. He waited in silence like he expected an apology. I told him I had been working. I asked what he needed. He said he just wanted to feel important. I told him he mattered to me, but that importance did not come from constant reassurance. He nodded, dissatisfied. That was the night I understood what he was waiting for. He wanted escalation, emotion, proof in the form of reaction. When it did not come, he looked almost disappointed. I talked to Evelyn again. We sat at my kitchen table, tea cooling between us, the late afternoon light slanting across the counter. I told her about the cancellations, the comments, the way Daniel seemed to be poking at the edges of our peace. She listened, then said something that landed hard and clean. She said someone was trying to teach him how to measure love by response instead of consistency. She asked me what I planned to do. I told her I was not planning anything. I was simply refusing to perform. She nodded, approval quiet but firm. Work became my anchor. I had a large project nearing a decision point. A contract that would shape the next year of my business. I spent long hours reviewing plans, coordinating vendors, making choices that required clarity. It reminded me who I was when I was not being evaluated. Daniel knew about the project, but he asked fewer questions about it than usual. When I spoke about my day, he listened with half attention, then steered the conversation back to us. The test continued, spaced just enough apart to feel intentional. One evening, he picked a fight over a miscommunication that would have once merited a shrug. He repeated the same phrasing twice, as if reading from notes. He said my lack of reaction concerned him. He waited again. I did not fill the space. Eventually, he sighed and said maybe he was overthinking things. I agreed. The relief on his face was brief, replaced quickly by uncertainty. I could feel myself detaching, not dramatically, but decisively. It was not bitterness. It was clarity. I had spent too many years rebuilding my life to let someone else dictate the terms of my emotional expression. Then came the message that tied everything together. We were sitting on the couch one evening, the television on low. I was sketching ideas for a client when Daniel scrolled through his phone beside me. He tapped a message without realizing the volume was up. A voice filled the room, bright and confident, unmistakably Cynthia. She was explaining exactly what he needed to do. Pull back, cancel plans, mention other women, create friction, see if she fights for you. You need someone who reacts, not someone who stays calm. The words hung in the air, undeniable. Daniel froze. I looked at him. He looked at the phone. He scrambled to silence it. But there was nothing left to hide. I did not raise my voice. I did not demand an explanation. I simply asked if he agreed with her. He hesitated, then said he did not know. He said they were just trying to help him understand what he needed. He said he felt confused. Confusion did not bother me. What bothered me was compliance. I told him calmly that I did not consent to being tested, that I did not believe love required performance, that if he needed instructions to feel secure, then the problem was not my calmness. He listened, eyes down, absorbing the words without arguing, without committing to change. After that, something in me settled. The guessing stopped. The anxiety lifted. I knew where we were headed, even if he did not yet. Our anniversary was a week away. The reservation was already made. I had booked a quiet weekend getaway months earlier, back when our relationship felt solid. I considered canceling everything, but decided not to. Not out of hope, out of integrity. I would show up as I always had. Whatever happened would happen without my interference. In the days leading up to it, Daniel grew increasingly restless. He checked his phone constantly. He paced. He rehearsed sentences under his breath. He asked if I was happy, then seemed dissatisfied with my answer no matter how I phrased it. I watched him with a calm I did not have to fake. The night before our anniversary, I lay awake, thinking about Laura on the porch, about Evelyn at my table, about the quiet confidence I had rebuilt piece by piece over the years. I thought about how strange it was that at this stage of life, someone would still be playing games meant for people who did not yet know themselves. I was not angry. I was ready. Downstairs, Daniel's phone buzzed again, the sound muffled but familiar. I stayed where I was, eyes open in the dark, waiting for the morning to come. Whatever he had planned, it would not unfold the way he expected. Morning came quietly, as if nothing significant was approaching. Daniel moved through the house with a restless energy, opening cabinets he did not need, checking his phone, setting it down, then picking it up again. I watched him from the kitchen table while finishing my coffee, noticing how often his gaze drifted toward the screen even when it was dark. He said he had a busy day ahead, meetings, errands, things he needed to handle before the weekend. I told him I had a client walkthrough in Glen Ellen and paperwork to finish afterward. Our voices were polite, familiar, almost rehearsed. We were two adults discussing logistics, not two people standing at the edge of something fragile. After he left, I sat for a long moment in the quiet. I thought about how easily routines continue, even when meaning has shifted underneath them. I gathered my things and drove to the client site, letting the steady motion of traffic ground me. Work still made sense. Measurements, schedules, budgets, decisions with consequences that were clear and honest. The walkthrough went smoothly. The director approved the final layout, signed off on the last revisions. As I packed up my materials, I felt a surge of relief that had nothing to do with my relationship. This was my life, my work, proof that I was steady even when other things were not. My phone buzzed while I was driving home. Daniel had sent a short message asking if we were still on for dinner that night. I replied yes, nothing more. He responded with a thumbs up, then nothing else. That evening, he suggested we eat at home. He cooked, moving around the kitchen with exaggerated care, like someone trying to perform normalcy perfectly. He asked about my day. I answered. He told me about his. I listened. The rhythm was familiar, but the warmth was missing. After dinner, we sat in the living room. The television was on, volume low. I opened my laptop to review some notes. Daniel scrolled through his phone beside me. The air felt charged, like a storm waiting for the right pressure to break. Then it happened again. A voice message played out loud, sudden and unmistakable. Cynthia. Her tone was confident, instructive, almost cheerful. She talked about timing, about pulling back right before the anniversary, about watching closely to see if I would react. She said calm women were dangerous because they made men doubt themselves. She said love needed proof, not patience. The sound filled the room for several seconds before Daniel managed to stop it. He froze, phone still in his hand, color draining from his face. I closed my laptop and turned toward him slowly. I asked him how long they had been discussing this. He swallowed and said it was not like that. He said they were just sharing opinions. He said he had not decided anything yet. His words stumbled over each other, vague and incomplete. I told him what I had already told him before, that I did not agree to being evaluated, that I did not believe in provoking pain to measure attachment. I said it calmly, without accusation, because I was no longer trying to convince him of anything. I was stating a boundary. He rubbed his face with his hands and said he felt torn. He said his friends thought I was too detached. He said they worried he was settling. He said he did not know what he wanted anymore. I listened, not interrupting. When he finished, I asked him one simple question. I asked whether he trusted his own experience with me or the theories of people whose lives were filled with constant conflict. He did not answer right away. He looked at the floor, then at the ceiling, then back at his phone like it might offer guidance. That pause told me more than any response could have. I told him I would not compete with a committee, that if he needed a chorus to decide how he felt, then he was not actually present in the relationship. I said I cared about him, but I cared more about my own dignity. My voice did not shake. I surprised myself with how settled I felt. He said he did not want to lose me. He said he just wanted reassurance. I told him reassurance came from consistency, not from tests. I asked him what he planned to do next. He said he needed time to think. Time. The word hung between us, heavy with implication. Time to consult, time to analyze, time to receive more instructions. I nodded and told him to take the time he needed. Then I stood up and went upstairs to prepare for bed. I did not slam doors. I did not make a scene. I moved through the routine like someone closing a chapter, not knowing yet how the next one would begin. In the bedroom, I packed a small overnight bag for my upcoming client trip. Folding clothes neatly, methodically, Daniel stood in the doorway for a moment, watching me, then turned away without speaking. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not deeply, but without the tight coil of anticipation that had kept me awake. In the morning, I woke early and made coffee again, the familiar ritual anchoring me. Daniel came down later, looking tired. He said he had barely slept. He said he kept thinking. I asked him what he had concluded. He said he still felt unsure. He said the anniversary dinner might be a good time to talk things through properly. I agreed, not because I believed it would fix anything, but because I knew clarity often required confrontation with reality. Over the next few days, his behavior shifted again. He grew quieter, more inward. He checked his phone constantly, then left it behind deliberately, as if testing himself. Messages from Monica, Diane, and Cynthia continued to light up the screen. He did not hide them. He did not show them to me either. I noticed him practicing sentences under his breath while brushing his teeth. I noticed him pausing mid-conversation, then starting over with different wording. The language sounded polished, impersonal, like something memorized. I did not comment on it. I did not interfere. I watched with a calm curiosity, the way you observe weather when you know you cannot control it. The night before our anniversary, we ate a quiet dinner and talked about nothing important. He asked if I was looking forward to the weekend. I said yes. It was true. I was looking forward to resolution, whatever form it took. Before bed, he checked his phone one last time. I saw Cynthia's name on the screen, followed by Monica's, then Diane's, a flurry of activity, like a team finalizing strategy. He turned the phone face down. In the darkness, I felt no fear, no certainty. The next day would not belong to them, no matter how quickly. I closed my eyes and waited for morning. The restaurant was quieter than I expected for a Friday night. Warm light spilling across white tablecloths and polished wood. Daniel drove us there without music, his phone resting face up in the console between us. It lit up twice on the way, then again as we parked. He did not. Inside, he smiled and tucked just far enough from the rest of the room to feel private. Daniel pulled out my chair. I thanked him and sat, taking in the familiar details, the soft clink of glasses, the low hum of conversation. I felt strangely calm, like I was walking into a room where I already knew the ending of the story. Daniel barely looked at the menu. He set it down and reached for his water, took a long drink, then set the glass back carefully. His phone vibrated under the table. I saw the movement of his leg, restless, bouncing once, then stopping. He took a breath that sounded deliberate. The server arrived and asked if we wanted our usual wine. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. When she left, silence settled between us, not awkward, just heavy. I watched his face, the tension around his eyes, the way his jaw tightened and released like he was bracing himself. He finally spoke, his voice measured, practiced. He said he had been thinking a lot about us. The words landed exactly as I expected them to. He said he felt like something was missing. He said we had grown comfortable in a way that worried him. He said he needed more passion, more proof that I would fight for the relationship if things got hard. As he spoke, I noticed the cadence. The phrasing, it was not his natural way of talking. It sounded like something read aloud. He looked at me, eyes wide, searching, waiting. I asked him who had helped him find those words. The question was gentle, not accusatory. He froze. His gaze flicked down toward the table, then toward his pocket where his phone rested. He said no one. He said those were his feelings. I nodded slowly and asked him to try again. I told him to tell me what he wanted in his own words. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Nothing came out. His shoulders sagged just slightly, the performance slipping. The server returned with the wine. She poured carefully, unaware of the tension she was interrupting. Daniel thanked her and waited until she walked away before speaking again. This time his voice cracked with frustration. He said I was not even reacting. He said I was proving his point. I told him calmly that you do not end a relationship and then complain when someone accepts it. I told him that I was not going to chase a breakup designed to make me perform. I told him that if he wanted to end things, then they were ended. He stared at me like I had changed the script mid-scene. He said he did not mean anything. He said it was supposed to be a conversation. He said his friends had told him that I was joking. I felt a flicker of sadness then. Not for the relationship, but for him. I told him I cared enough not to play games at this stage of life. I told him I would not beg to be chosen. His phone vibrated again. He glanced at it without thinking, then caught himself and turned it face down. I watched the color drain from his face as understanding settled in. He whispered my name, then stopped. He did not know what to say without guidance. I reached for my purse and pulled out my card. The server was already approaching with the check, eyes flicking between us, sensing something off. I handed her the card before she finished speaking and told her quietly that I would take care of it. Daniel watched in disbelief. He asked if I was really doing this. I told him yes. I told him he had made his choice when he invited other voices into a decision that should have been his alone. When the receipt came back, I signed it, stood, and pushed my chair in gently. I did not rush. I did not dramatize the moment. I looked at him one last time and told him to own what he had started. He reached out slightly, his hand hovering in the air. Uncertain, he said, "Wait." I asked him what he was waiting for. He had no answer. I walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air. The door closed behind me with a soft final sound. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing in, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. In that, the world continued. Glasses clinked. People laughed. Life moved on. I did not look back. At home, I took off my shoes and set my purse down, the quiet settling around me like a blanket. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Then again and again, messages stacked up, missed calls lighting the screen. I did not open any of them. I went upstairs, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence felt different now. Not heavy, clean. Somewhere across town, Daniel was likely still sitting at that table, surrounded by the consequences of listening to the wrong voices. I felt no satisfaction in that thought, only clarity. I turned off the light and lay back, staring at the ceiling, aware that the hardest part was not the ending itself, but the aftermath waiting just beyond it. I closed my eyes and let the night take over. Morning arrived without ceremony. Light slipped through the curtains, pale and unassuming, like it did not know anything had changed. I lay still for a while, listening to the quiet of the house, noticing how different it felt now that nothing was waiting for me to manage it. No tension humming under the surface, no anticipation of someone else's mood. My phone was face down on the nightstand. I did not need to look at it to know what I would see. I made coffee, moved through the kitchen slowly, deliberately, letting myself exist in the space without narrating it. When I finally picked up the phone, the screen lit up with missed calls and long messages stacked one after another. Daniel's name filled the display. I did not read them, not yet. Instead, I showered, dressed, and sat at the dining table with my pen. I had a client call scheduled for mid-morning, a vendor confirmation to send, a list of things that still needed doing. Life had not paused for heartbreak. I appreciated that more than I expected. It was Laura who called first. Not a text, a call. She did not waste time on small talk. She asked me what happened. I told her it was over. She exhaled slowly, like someone who had been holding their breath for a while. She said she was sorry, not for me exactly, but for the situation. She said she had She said he was shaken, defensive, embarrassed. She said she had told him plainly that he had crossed a line. I listened, feeling oddly distant from it all. I told her I appreciated her honesty. She told me she understood why I walked away. She said she wished he had listened sooner. We said goodbye gently, like two people acknowledging something had ended the way it needed to. The messages kept coming, some apologetic, some confused, some angry in that quiet, wounded way that still tried to assign blame. One said I had misunderstood everything. Another said it was just a test. Another asked why I had not fought harder. That one made me laugh out loud. A short, sharp sound that surprised me. Giving up would have meant staying. Leaving had required clarity. By afternoon pass, the calls slowed, the messages grew longer, more desperate. I still did not respond. Silence is not cruelty. Sometimes it is simply an answer someone does not want to hear. Work pulled me back in. The assisted living project moved forward. A new client reached out about a renovation consultation. I took notes, returned emails, focused on decisions that did not involve emotional negotiation. It felt grounding, almost therapeutic. That evening, Evelyn came over with takeout and no questions. She hugged me once, firm and brief, then set the bags down and started unpacking containers like she had been doing it her whole life. We ate at the kitchen counter. I told her what happened, not in dramatic detail, just the facts. She shook her head slowly and said she was proud of me. I shrugged. Pride was not what I felt. Relief was closer. Later that night, Laura called again. She sounded tired. She told me Daniel had been crying all day, that he was replaying the dinner over and over, saying he had not meant to end things, that he thought I would push back, that I would prove how much I cared. She told me she had asked him why he needed proof at all. I did not feel satisfaction hearing that, just confirmation. I told Laura I hoped he figured things out for himself. I meant it. Growth is harder when it comes too late, but it still matters. Over the next few days, the noise from Daniel tapered off. Fewer messages, longer gaps between them. I assumed he was It felt inevitable. Information has a way of finding you when you are not looking for it. A mutual acquaintance mentioned in passing that Monica had been blaming Cynthia for pushing Daniel too far. Someone else said Diane thought I had overreacted, that I was cold, that I never loved him properly. I did not correct them. Other people's narratives are not my responsibility. What reached me more clearly were the patterns. Monica started dating someone new and interrogated him relentlessly until he pulled away. Diane's bitterness drove people off with exhausting predictability. Cynthia tried to offer advice to someone else and found herself ignored. Her authority diminished now that her methods had been exposed. None of it felt like revenge. It felt like gravity. One afternoon, Daniel showed up at my door. I had not expected that. He stood there holding a small box, eyes red, shoulders slumped, looking older than I remembered. I did not invite him in. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. He said he had brought some of my things. Snacks I liked, a book I had lent him, a letter folded carefully in his hand. He said he had not meant the breakup. He said it was not real. He said his friends had convinced him it was the right way to test our bond. I told him quietly that tests only work if both people agree to them. That what hurt was not their influence, but his willingness to hand over his judgment. He asked if we could start over. He asked if I would read the letter. I told him he could explain himself without props. He tried. He stumbled. He repeated phrases that sounded familiar. He could not articulate what he wanted without referencing what others had told him he should want. I told him I did not doubt his regret. I doubted his readiness. I told him the relationship ended the moment he turned it into an experiment. He stood there for a long moment, then nodded, like something had finally landed. He left the box at my feet and walked away without looking back. I watched until his car turned the corner, then went inside and locked the door. The house felt different after that. Not emptier, quieter, cleaner. I slept deeply that night, the kind of sleep that comes when your nervous system finally stands down. Weeks passed. Life reorganized itself around the absence. I cooked more, walked more, took on projects I had postponed. I stopped bracing for emotional whiplash that never came. One evening, Laura and I met for coffee. She told me Daniel had finally admitted his friends were not helping him, that he had relied on them to avoid taking responsibility for his own uncertainty. She told me he understood what he lost, even if understanding did not change the outcome. I listened, stirred my coffee, nodded. Understanding does not undo damage. It explains it. When I got home that night, I stood in the living room and noticed how still everything felt. Not lonely, peaceful. I realized I had not imagined alternate endings in days. I was not replaying conversations. I was not wondering what I could have said differently. That was when I knew I was already further along than I thought. I turned off the lights and went upstairs, leaving the box from Daniel unopened by the door. Some things did not need to be revisited. The quiet held, steady and unchallenged. As I settled into bed and let the next chapter wait until it was ready to arrive. Time has a way of rearranging people when you stop trying to control the outcome. I did not follow Daniel's life after he left that box at my door. I did not check social media. I did not ask Laura for updates. I focused instead on my own routines, letting days stack on top of each other without commentary. But information still found its way to me, not because I went looking for it, but because people talk when things fall apart in visible ways. The first I heard about was Monica. It came from a woman I knew casually through work, someone who mentioned over coffee that Monica had started seeing a man from her real estate office. She said he seemed steady, kind, not flashy. According to her, things were fine at first. Then Monica began asking questions. Why he used certain emojis. Why he took longer to respond some days. Why he liked a photo one of his coworkers posted. Within weeks, the man pulled away. He told someone he felt like he was under investigation. Monica said he was hiding something. No one believed her. Diane's unraveling followed a familiar pattern. She had always spoken about men as if disappointment was inevitable. Apparently, she began dating again and could not stop anticipating betrayal. If a message came late, it meant something. If plans changed, it meant something. Eventually, people stopped setting her up with anyone. The constant suspicion was exhausting. She called it intuition. Others called it negativity. Cynthia's situation reached me through Laura, who mentioned it carefully, as if not wanting to sound unkind. Cynthia had tried to guide someone else through a similar loyalty test, encouraging distance and ambiguity to provoke reaction. The person responded by stepping away entirely. Word spread. Cynthia's confidence took a hit. People stopped asking for advice. Her authority depended on influence, and once that cracked, there was nothing underneath to support it. The three of them, who once spoke with certainty about everyone else's relationships, began turning on each other. Monica blamed Cynthia for pushing ideas too far. Diane accused Monica of being controlling. Cynthia claimed they had misunderstood her intentions. Group chats exploded. Screenshots were shared. Old resentments surfaced. Within a short time, the alliance that had once felt so solid dissolved under its own weight. I did not feel vindicated hearing any of this. I felt confirmed. Patterns play out whether you watch them or not. Daniel was left without the constant without commentary. He had to sit with his own thoughts. He admitted, eventually, that he had leaned on his friends because making decisions scared him. He said it was easier to follow instructions than to trust his own feelings. Losing me forced him to see that avoidance clearly for the first time. When Laura told me that, I felt a soft ache, not regret, but recognition. Sometimes understanding arrives after consequences, not before. That does not make it useless, but it does make it late. My own life expanded in without compromise. I slept through the night. The quiet that once felt precarious now felt earned. One afternoon, as I reorganized a shelf in my living room, I found the box Daniel had left. It was still sealed, untouched. I sat on the floor for a moment, looking at it, then picked it up and carried it to the garage. I placed it on a shelf with other things waiting to be donated. It was not an act of anger. It was an act of completion. A few weeks later, Laura and I met again, this time more relaxed. She told me Daniel had apologized to her for dismissing her concerns. She said he was learning, slowly, to make decisions without consulting a committee. She did not ask me to reconsider. She did not hint at reconciliation. She simply shared the information because she believed in truth, even when it changed nothing. I thanked her and meant it. Some apologies are not bridges, they are acknowledgments. That evening, walking home under a sky just beginning to darken, I thought about how often women are told to soften endings, to make space for others' growth at the expense of their own peace. I had done that once, years ago, and it had cost me more than I was willing to pay again. The absence of drama was its own reward. No constant analysis, no tests, no invisible standards. Just days that unfolded without tension. As summer edged toward fall, I noticed how little I thought about Daniel now. Not because I was forcing myself not to, but because there was nothing left to process. The relationship had run its course, not in a blaze, but in clarity. One night, lying in bed with the windows open, listening to distant traffic and cicadas, I realized I had not imagined an alternate ending in weeks. I was no longer asking what if. That question had lost its grip. Peace, I learned, does not arrive with fanfare. It settles quietly when you stop negotiating with what no longer serves you. I turned off the light and let the darkness rest around me, content to leave the past where it belonged, knowing the final chapter would not need spectacle to feel complete. Completion does not arrive all at once. It sneaks in through ordinary moments until one day you realize nothing inside you is waiting to be resolved anymore. That understanding came to me on a quiet Sunday morning, months after everything ended, while I stood at the kitchen sink watching sunlight move slowly across the floor. There was no dramatic realization, just a calm awareness that my life finally belonged to me again. Daniel did reach out one last time, not with urgency, not with desperation, but with something closer to humility. It was a short message asking if I would be willing to talk, not about getting back together, but about understanding what went wrong. I thought about it carefully before responding. I agreed to meet him for coffee, not because I owed him closure, but because I trusted myself enough now to sit across from him without losing ground. We met at a small cafe near the river, neutral territory, quiet and unassuming. He looked different, not worse, just stripped of certainty. He told me he had been in therapy, that he was learning how much he had outsourced his decisions to people who were louder than he was. He said losing me had forced him to face that pattern. I listened without interrupting, hands wrapped around my mug, feeling no urge to rescue or reassure. When he finished, he apologized. Not for the breakup itself, but for turning our relationship into something it never needed to be. He said he understood now that love was not supposed to be a performance. I thanked him for saying that. I told him I was glad he was doing the work. I did not offer hope. I did not soften the boundary. We parted kindly. There was no tension, no longing, just two people acknowledging a chapter that had closed exactly when it needed to. I walked home afterward feeling lighter than I had expected. Not because he had changed, but because I no longer needed him to. My life continued to expand in quiet ways. I traveled more for work, trusted my instincts on projects, said no without apology. I spent evenings reading on the porch, mornings walking without a destination. Friends noticed the difference before I did. They said I seemed more present, more myself. I realized then how much energy I had spent monitoring someone else's emotional weather. Laura and I stayed in touch. She never tried to mediate or revisit the past. She respected my decision and my peace. Evelyn remained my anchor, reminding me often that choosing yourself does not make you cold. It makes you honest. One afternoon, I cleaned out a drawer and found an old photo of Daniel and me from years earlier. I looked at it for a moment, then put it back without ceremony. I did not feel sadness. I felt gratitude for the clarity that followed. What surprised me most was how healing arrived without noise. No dramatic breakthrough, no tearful confession in the middle of the night, just steady sleep, focused work, laughter that came easily again. Peace did not demand attention. It simply stayed. If there is one thing I learned from all of this, it is that love that requires tests is not love rooted in trust. It is fear dressed up as passion. And when someone needs you to prove your worth by reacting to discomfort they create, they are not ready to meet you where you stand. I would rather be alone and calm than partnered in confusion. That truth settled in me so completely that it no longer felt like a choice. It felt like alignment. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever found yourself being evaluated instead of valued, I invite you to share your thoughts. Let me know what clarity looked like in your own life, or what moment helped you choose peace over performance. Stay here, stay curious, and stay kind to yourself. Sometimes the strongest ending is simply walking away and letting quiet do the rest.